Okay, so I had a student ask me a specific question about using a constraint. She wants to constrain a policeman's badge to the shirt of an animated character, but I think it'd be appropriate maybe to talk about constraints in general and then show how that specific example would work. So if you're doing any kind of rigging whatsoever, you have to use constraints. They're your friend. They help you do lots of different tasks. You just got to get used to using them. Some are more commonplace than others. Depends on what you need. I'll try to cover just the basics. So let's look at, I've got a few different objects in the scene. I've got something hidden for the latter part of the example. So let's look at this cylinder and this cube here and look at how constraints might work. So in this case, sorry, little interruption there for a second. All right, so I left off, we had the cylinder and the cube here. And how can we use constraints to either position these or make sure that one goes along for the ride for the other or orients itself, however that might work, right? So let's just start with the first one up here, parent constraint. So I'm going to select the cylinder and, in fact, let's do it this way. Let's select the box and then the cylinder. And when we do constraints, we always select the controlling object first, and then the object that's going to get constrained to it one way or the other. So let's go ahead and choose parent, but let's choose the option for it. And we'll reset the settings. So you can see here the default for this is maintain offset. So if I do this constraint, and I just hit apply now, we don't see anything happened, but if I look in the outliner, I can see that the cylinder over here now has a constrain attribute or object added to it, right? So if I move this now, you can see that this is along for the ride. You might say, so why would I do this other than, couldn't I just parent it? The whole idea with constraints is certainly for rigs, it makes it easy because you're dealing with multiple hierarchies. In an animation, you might want to turn something on and off. So if this was a hand picking up a wand, we might want to have the constraint turned off and then at a certain point of the animation turn it on so that the hand could pick up the wand, stuff like that. The parent constraint is the one used most often because you can do translate and rotate with it. It's really kind of a combination of multiples. So this is the one that you would use the most. So let's undo that. And let's turn maintain offset off. Let's check that off and hit apply. You can see what has happened now is the cylinder has moved to the center and also the same rotation as the transform for the cube itself. So now when I move the cube, this is all lined up, right? So that seems self-explanatory. The last thing I'll say about this is using parent constraint is a great way to line up objects for various reasons, especially in rigging, even though you're not going to do a constraint. Let's say that I wanted to make sure that the cylinder was exactly at the center of the cube, but then when I do the animation, I want the cube to be a child of the cylinder so that when I move the cylinder, this, maybe this is rotating the whole entire time and it stays with it. So let's go ahead and close that and I'll come back over to the outliner. So here's my cube and my cylinder, which has been constrained to it and lined up perfectly now. So now what I'm going to do is delete that constraint. I now know that this object is exactly at the position that I want. I'll do, say, freeze transformation, so it's all zeroed out. Delete by type history. And now what I'll do is take the cube, and I'm just going to middle mouse button, drag and drop. Or, if I wanted to, I could have selected it, then shift select the cube, and hit P for parent. So now the cube is along for the ride. So let's just animate that. Let's say, what is that? The Y rotation. We'll put a key in there. And we'll make that 720. All right, so now it has the freedom to do whatever we wanted. And we can now animate the cube, or sorry, the cylinder. Let's just say key selected, go to frame 0, and let's move it up here. And for good measure, let's offset the rotation. All right. Oops, I forgot to do a key there. Thought it had me some auto keyframing turned on, right? So we use constraints to make sure that the cylinder was lined up where the cube was at the beginning of the animation. Did that, then deleted the constraint, reparented in the reverse order, and now I have the cube and the cylinder lined up perfectly, but reversed in that order. So again, we can use constraints just to turn, just to do that hardcore, or we can use it as kind of a rigging procedure to set up, make sure the objects are oriented and positioned the right way. Okay, so that's the first part of it. Let's delete that, and let's go back and create a couple more objects. Let's create this one, and let's just create a sphere. Okay, so in fact, let's actually create a cube. This will be a little bit easier to see. So that's the parent constraint. We can also use, these are the kind of old school constraint, point and orient. So I can select this one here and the cube itself, or the pyramid, or cone, I guess. So let's turn off maintain offset and just hit apply. So now I know that this is exactly where this object is, the same position, but if I rotate the cube, it has no bearing on the orientation, but if I rotate it, or I transform it, this moves along with it. Okay, so that's point, which is very helpful. And let's do, I guess, let's just go back a couple. All right, and let's do the other one. Let's do orient. And this time I'll turn maintain offset on, just so you can see here, they both have a rotation of 0, 0, 0, so it isn't going to matter, but I'll go ahead and hit apply. So now as I rotate one, the other one rotates the exact same, right? It's not pointing at it, but they are rotating or oriented in the same direction. Let's do undo again. And this time, let's use this one and this one, and we'll use, and I'm going to skip over scale. I think that's self-evident. And let's do aim. So the aim one's a little trickier. What we have here is, I'm not going to turn on the offset. What I want is this object to point at this object. So there's an aim vector, which in this case is set up to be the x. Well, I don't want the x to point. I want the object itself to point at the cube. So let's make the aim vector the y. So this is the one that's going to point at it. And the up vector, because to be able to do this, Maya has to use some complicated math to figure out which way is up. Right? If I'm a plane, I can say, let's point the plane in a certain direction, but hopefully let's maintain that the top stays like pointing upward. Is it arcs around the Earth? Is it going in its flight direction, right? So you could choose whatever axis you want. It could be even a negative axis. I could do negative x and negative 1 for the x, but in this case, we'll just use z. So what it's going to do is rotate this around. So this points here, the y, and the z is going to point upward when I make that 1. So 1 means yes, 0 means no. Let's go ahead and hit apply. And what did I do wrong? Oh, I still had a constraint in there. My bad. All right. Okay. So now when this moves around, you can see the cone always looks at it. One thing that might not be as evident, it's a little tricky here, is that when the object is directly below, you can get weird rotations because it doesn't really know which way is up. And it's doing a pretty good job holding on there, but you can't really see it, but there's a little shift that's going on there. It's not bad. Okay. But yeah, so you have to be careful with the aim vector. Sometimes that can cause problems. So orient or aim or target is what some programs would call that, is another useful one. All right, so those are the basics that can be used a lot to help you with the rigging and aligning objects. So let's just delete those. Let's go back to our example. So let me turn a layer on here. So this is our, let's make sure I got it right. So I just created a cylinder and then a little joint chain, and then I bound that object to it, and I did as just a quick rotation on the y-axis for each one of those objects to frame 30 and then back to 60 for our little test. All right, so now we'll go to frame 1, and I'm going to create a locator. And how you go about doing this is totally up to you. I'm going to show you just a little more layered approach for this, depending on what it is that you want to do. So there is our locator, and I've moved it out of position, or out of the center, I guess I shouldn't say out of position, just so I can select it more easily. There's no need to really try to line it up, because this is going to do it for us. So I've right-clicked on the object and said face, and I'm going to select that face there, and then I'm going to hold down the shift key and select the locator, and now I'll go to point on poly, and make sure the maintain offset, and this is the default. If I reset the settings, this should be off. We're going to constrain all the axes, and we'll just go ahead and say apply, and it's positioned the locator now to be exactly at the center of the polygon, basically at the polygon normal, very center and oriented the same as that polygon itself. So now if I scrub through there, you can see that that's just sticking to the surface the way that we would want that to, right? So that's the first part of it. So this is just the locator here. I could have used any object. I could have used an empty group. A locator maybe is an effective way of doing this. I'm going to now go up and create a NURBS circle, right? And I'll just pull this off to the side. And what I'm going to do here is position this so that it's totally lined up with the locator itself. So I've got the locator selected, and then I'll shift select the circle, and I'm going to just do parent constraint, and let's make sure that maintain offset's turned off, right? So that just moved the NURB circle directly to where the locator is, right? So they're totally lined up. Now I'm just going to delete that constraint, take the NURB circle, and parent it to the locator, right? And now that it's there, I'll just go ahead and, in fact, it's already zeroed out because it's the exact rotation or exact position. That's awesome. And let's go ahead and create just a dummy object that's going to be the representation of our badge, right? So we'll scale that up. All right, and maybe let's just smooth this real quick. Okay, so this will be kind of our badge. Now what I want to do here, it's totally up to you. What you could do is reposition where the pivot is. Maybe it's here, maybe it's up at the top of the object. Maybe this is where you want this to rotate. So now what I'll do is take this, and I'm going to parent constrain it to this NURBS circle. Okay. And we'll just do, there we go. Okay. And I can go ahead and delete that constraint if I want. Let's select it there. So we've matched the position, the setup where I want it. Go ahead and position that there. And from here, if I want to, probably would have been the better thing. Let's put that up. Yeah, let's put that there. All right, so now we'll select this, and I'm going to redo the parent constraint. Except for I need to, modify freeze transformations. Okay. And this one's selected with you. So what we have there is that change in the orientation. So we'll just select these two, go back to parent constraint, and this time turn on maintain offset and hit apply. So now I have a controller that I can use to animate how this works, okay, based on wherever I want it to kind of rotate or pivot. But at the same time, right, so I have a little bit of freedom of control as far as the animation, right? And you might want to think about that, like, you know, how is that clasped onto the shirt, and can it dangle or or whatever the case may be, right? So I can animate and key that, which is and we'll key that there. And what was that, back to frame 60, put that to 0 again. Okay. Right, so, and then I'm just quickly doing this, but we could add a lot of little jiggle, I guess, to it there if we wanted to. Let's turn on our auto keyframing. All right, so a layered approach. Certainly you could just constrain that to the geometry using the point to poly, totally fine, but I wanted to demonstrate how you could use some of these constraints to line up things, or how to use offset or not offset for that object. But now we have something that has plenty of controls to it. We can animate. We don't have to worry about this being constrained to the object because the locator is the one constrained to that surface, right? So we wouldn't be able to animate this, but now we have the freedom to animate because it's along for the ride. It isn't actually constrained. And then the cube itself, we didn't have to parent it. We could have if you wanted to, but we have the freedom to detach it because it is a constraint. So what happens if, you know, the badge got knocked loose? We could then animate that falling away from the shirt itself. Okay, constraints are our friends when we rig.